Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell in Washington, where President Trump is making a direct appeal to the international community to help the U.S. secure the Strait of Hormuz to avoid a global oil supply crisis, even as he claims the U.S. could secure the strait by itself and says that we don't need the oil. It comes as the White House continues to try to reassure consumers that the spike in energy prices due to the conflict will be temporary. Yesterday, President Trump said he was demanding countries that rely on oil from the Middle East join the U.S. in forming a coalition to secure the strait, which supplies roughly 20% of the global oil market. Today, the president doubling down on his calls for a global coalition.
I strongly encourage the other nations to get involved with us and get involved quickly and with great enthusiasm. I have that from a number of them, and I'd like to say their names, but frankly, I don't know if they would want me to or not, because maybe they don't want to be targeted. But I say, wouldn't matter if you're targeted or not, because this is a paper tiger that we're dealing with now. It wasn't a paper tiger 2 weeks ago. It's a paper tiger now.
That assessment comes as the president is also claiming that Iran has been, quote, literally obliterated in the war and that its leadership has effectively been dismantled, prompting this question from reporters.
Now that you've announced that the U.S. has destroyed all of Iran's mine-laying ships, why can't the U.S. just immediately reopen the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, we could, but it takes two to tango. We have to get people to take their billion-dollar ship and drive it up. You know, these ships are very expensive. They can cost up to $2 billion. So they don't want to take a chance that, gee, I think you'll be okay. They got to know it. We don't know if they even set any mines. But the thought that they may have is enough to keep people from saying, we don't need it.
Among the countries the president is calling out for help, the United Kingdom, France, South Korea, Japan, and China, all responding to his request with mixed reactions, and none doing so publicly, none committing to deploying assets to the Strait of Hormuz so far. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister telling state TV the Strait of Hormuz is open and only closed to enemies. Yesterday, crude oil hit $100 a barrel. Today, those prices are coming down to around $93 a barrel, but still 40% higher than when the war began. Fuel prices also continue to climb, with the average regular gas price per gallon inching closer to that $4 mark. Yesterday on Meet the Press, Energy Secretary Chris Wright saying it could be a few weeks before those prices come down.
After the conflict is over, you'll start to see prices come back down. It is a short-term disruption in the flow of energy. Americans are feeling it right now. Americans will feel it for a few more weeks. But at the end, we will have removed the greatest risk to global energy supplies.
As for now, how much longer this could go on is a question mark, and Iran's foreign minister says there is no reason to negotiate with the U.S. President Trump was also asked about the possibility of negotiations, and here's what he had to say.
I don't know if they're ready yet. They're taking a pounding. I don't know if they're ready yet. And we don't even know their leaders. Look, all of their leaders are dead, as far as we know, but they're all dead. We don't know who we're dealing with. We met with the next group, but we don't know who their leader is. We have people wanting to negotiate. We have no idea who they are.
Joining me now are NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung, and NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley. Welcome, one and all. Glad to have you here. Monica, let me start with you. Traffic through the Strait has really ground to a halt, in part because the companies that have the vessels don't want to expose themselves to the risk. Do you get a sense that the president's attempt to form a coalition is actually materializing?
It doesn't seem like it, Kelly, because he's trying to do this retroactively, right? He's trying to kind of bring this coalition together to countries, asking them for help when they weren't really consulted in the first place on launching this attack against Iran with Israel. So countries are saying, whoa, 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 wait a second, not so fast. And also they're saying this isn't our war. This isn't necessarily our conflict, even if we do have a vested interest in getting the Strait of Hormuz to be safe enough for vessels to pass through it. So they want to have a more diplomatic conversation. That is certainly not what President Trump likes to necessarily want to engage in. He said about the UK Prime Minister, for instance, who said, well, let me talk to my team first and maybe we'll have a discussion and I'll make a determination and get back to you. And the president said in this event today, why does he need to talk to his team? Why can't he just tell me he wants to help and go ahead with it? So a difference in leadership style and a difference in the approach to this very complicated diplomatic challenge.
And so revealing, because the president doesn't feel he needs to consult, therefore another head of government might not need to. Is there a conflict in these discussions with the president saying he needs this international coalition, but at the same time is describing the threat from Iran as far reduced?
Yeah, I think there are kind of a myriad of contradictions that the president has been making here, because he is trying to make the argument that militarily so many of these targets have been hit, so many of the objectives have been met. But clearly this economic consideration and dealing with the Strait of Hormuz, which he says he knew and was aware this was going to be such a problem, makes it very, very difficult to be able to declare victory in any sense, because until you have solved that, we don't really know how the president can make that claim. And then you also are seeing these reports of additional resources, of Marines and a unit that are going to be sent to the region. Unclear exactly what their goal will be and what their role will be. But it is very hard for the president to say, on one hand, we are ready to wind down, while on the other, you're seeing a ramp up in that sense.
We're still waiting this afternoon for an event that is yet to take place, as I understand it, with the president and Vice President Vance in the same room together, which might not sound unusual, except we have not seen that since the war began. What should we be looking for?
Just a few days ago, it was the president who admitted that the vice president did have some, quote, philosophical differences in his approach to what they should do leading up to the decision making on the war against Iran. The fact that we are seeing them, and there they are at this event now, is notable because likely there will be some questions presented to one or both of them about that gulf, about that difference in opinion. Now, the vice president, when he was asked about this a couple of days ago, said, I'm not going to reveal personal considerations and recommendations that I make to the commander-in-chief to the media. I'm not going to reveal that to all of us. But I think it is very instructive that the president doesn't really hesitate. When he's asked about it, he will say, yes, maybe we, differed on a couple of different things, but we're aligned on these others, which just sets up this whole other major conversation, as you know, Kelly, about 2028 and what this could mean for the president backing his own vice president, or potentially his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who's somebody that he has heaped praise on as we have seen this conflict over the last 3 weeks.
And Rubio's been so prominent in this whole discussion by virtue of the role that he plays. Courtney, let me bring you into this discussion as well. And we talk about the feasibility issues from the military side of things, of trying to form a coalition, of trying to bring these leaders together. Do you get a sense that there's any progress on this and that there's any definition as to what the roles would be if other nations joined in?
Yeah, it's not impossible that the militaries could come together and present some sort of a coalition that would be helping ships get through. But at this point, we don't see any real momentum towards that goal. There's options like things like some nations can provide aircraft that can do surveillance, maybe even provide air defenses in the way that they could defend against drones by shooting at them air-to-air missiles or whatever it is. So there's multiple options. There's unmanned systems that they could use as well. But again, at this point, we don't see any indication that is really moving in any direction. And it's in large part because of what Monica just said. That is, these countries weren't brought in advance. And even though they have an economic interest in this being the Strait of Hormuz, allowing for free flow of commercial traffic, they may not want to get involved militarily. And the reality is the same exact threat that exists to the U.S. Navy would exist for all of those other militaries as well. So there is a real threat to the military if they were to try and take on this challenge, even as a multi-nation coalition.
So it's an extraordinary ask from the president to these allies. We also need your expertise when it comes to that critical oil depot known as Karg Island in Iran. There have been questions about whether the U.S., now that there have been strikes there, would there be some plan to have any boots on the ground just to secure that critical area? Is that something that's being discussed?
It's not outside the realm of possible, and this is something that the U.S. has wargamed for years, the possibility of doing this. But the reality is, Kelly, it would take thousands of U.S. troops to accomplish that. And as difficult as it could be to take the island, holding it would be even more difficult and dangerous. And I think that's one of the big concerns here. It's not outside the realm of possible, but it would be a very dangerous endeavor. And again, it would take thousands of troops. Now, the question, though, is this one of the potential ways that the Trump administration wants to take this conflict? Does President Trump want to own Iranian oil or use Iranian oil as a leverage point? Because if so, Karg Island would be a critical piece to that potential equation.
We also heard today the president talking about disinformation in this war and the role of AI and talking about what Iran has done with that. What do we know about the potential of what that can do and how it might affect U.S. forces or other facilities in the region?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen so much AI content come out in just since this war started. But the reality is we were seeing it before that as well. I mean, one thing that AI has done, it's not just in the war in Iran. We saw it in Syria as well. But there has been a real use of AI for intelligence purposes. So the U.S. will gather all of this information, visual and satellite imagery and videos and things, and they can feed it into a computer, and the computer can help them pick targets. Now, the key here, Kelly, that we keep hearing about, though, is that a human being is still supposed to be involved in the targeting process. But this is a real point of discussion, especially after the school that was bombed early on. It's looking more and more likely that the United States was responsible for that in southern Iran. But AI is definitely playing a huge role in it. The president has been, according to his posting on Truth Social, he's frustrated that he says that some media are repeating some of these AI memes or fallacies that are out there. The reality is the White House is also putting out AI content as well, though, Kelly.
We've seen that quite a lot. And the dog bark was not AI, for those who are interested. Treats for that little one. No, never. It's real life. Brian, oil markets are back down after hitting $100 a barrel yesterday. I mean, that was a big marquee moment. What do you attribute that to?
Yeah, we were watching markets really closely when they opened up and had futures trading last night, and it seemed like oil prices were going to go to the moon. It was like $103, $104 at one point, and now here we are with oil markets settling around $93.50 on crude oil. Again, we've seen prices higher than that during the course of this conflict, but it hasn't necessarily, led to unease in terms of the concerns about prices at the pump, where consumer-facing prices are around $3.71 according to AAA. That is up over 70 cents compared to prior to all of this conflict emerging in the Middle East. Now, of course, the question is, when will there be more ships going through the Strait of Hormuz? If there's more ships that go through, it's as simple as that is when prices would come down. We heard from Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent earlier today on CNBC talking about optimism on all of this. Take a listen.
We are seeing more and more the fuel ships start to go through. The Iranian ships have been getting out already, and we've let that happen to supply the rest of the world. We've seen Indian ships go out now, so the Indians who rely very heavily on Gulf oil. We believe some Chinese ships have gone out. So that should start ramping up before there are any the flotillas or protective armadas in the Gulf. So we think that there will be a natural opening that the Iranians are letting out. And for now, we're fine with that. We want the world to be well supplied.
So it seems like that commentary, in addition to what we heard from President Trump earlier today, points to U.S. optimism that they can get more ships going through there. But, Kelly, we just showed that chart that shows the amount of ships that have passed through the Strait of Hormuz over the last few days, and you can see it is still dramatically lower, 3 compared to well over 100 prior to this conflict beginning. So even though we hear that optimism, we're not seeing it in the numbers yet. It's still, for all intents and purposes, closed off the Strait of Hormuz.
And when you consider that positive tone, Brian, Energy Secretary Wright was speaking with our colleague Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, and he said it'll be a few more weeks before the American people feel relief at the pump. Is it that simple? I tend to see prices go up very quickly and then down at a much different pace. What is your sense of that?
Yeah, and again, the context behind the conversation between Kristen Welker and also Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy, is important because he was also saying that, yes, there could be relief, but it might not be until the summer. Now, it's all about when ships can start going through the Strait of Hormuz. It's as simple as once those ships begin going out, it doesn't even have to be at the same rate as what we saw prior. Even if it's 10, 20, 30, maybe even 50 ships, that could lead to overall repricing in these global oil markets. I was talking to an analyst in the last few days that said the moment the Strait of Hormuz looks like it's open again, you could see barrels of oil go down $20 in one go. Again, if we're going by the math that every $10 for a barrel of oil translates to 25 cents at the pump per gallon for you and me, that can mean an instant savings of about 50 cents per gallon. But again, it's if the Strait of Hormuz reopens.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. And in just the time that we have been having our conversation here, Courtney has gotten some new information, some additional reporting on how the president is being advised about some next steps. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so one thing that we've learned, this is according to a number of our colleagues worked on this story together, is that according to 6 sources who are familiar with the president's daily information that he's presented on the war in Iran, that every day he is presented with what's known as an off-ramp or an option for how he can end the war if he wants to. Now, notably, we know that he has not done yet that at this point. Every single day he has continued to go forward with the military options, the military objectives. But in fact, there are advisors who are providing him with that option. And maybe one of the reasons that we hear this language that's so uncertain or that from the administration about exactly how long this war could go on, Kelly.
That is important context, and to get a sense that this is a part of the president's regular cadence of trying to make that decision, that is critical. Do you get a sense that there is any coalescing around a particular option, or is it just presenting him with an array of choices?
It seems to be that there is a decision, or there at this point there is a goal to complete these military objectives. So that is the most basic ones that they've laid out from the beginning. It's to go out, take out the Iranian Navy, to destroy their ballistic missile program, and to destroy their drone program. But Kelly, those are not easy to accomplish. The U.S. military has made a huge amount of progress in the first 2+ weeks of this, but they still have a stretch to go. So the fact that the president every single day is getting the option for an off-ramp when they have really completed a lot of the task and really just taken out a lot of Iran's military capabilities, it just opens up the possibility that the president may decide one day that he is tired of the headlines about the Strait of Hormuz, that he's tired about this billions of dollars that are being spent in this war. But again, as of now, he's not taking that off-ramp.
Great new reporting. Thank you for bringing it to us, Courtney. We always appreciate that you can juggle a lot of things. Thank you so much. Let me turn now to Matt. And as we've mentioned, we're now into week 3. And let's get a sense of what it's like on the ground in the region. The situation has obviously changed a lot. And have you gotten a sense that in Tel Aviv there have been more strikes? What's your picture there?
Well, as a matter of fact, Kelly, we just got an alert right now. You might be hearing this all around, saying that in the next couple of minutes they're expecting another incoming, probably from Iran. But we've been hearing these with some regularity. And in fact, it doesn't really seem like it's been letting up. But what we have heard from the IDF is that now these salvos that are being fired by the Iranians contain fewer and fewer projectiles in them. So while we're still hearing the sirens all day long and often all night long, and though they have been dispersing quite a little bit, most of these missile salvos don't really have that many missiles in them, and they're causing very few injuries. So things have shifted, and that's why we're starting to see this week schools are going to partially begin to reopen. It's already been several weeks since offices were reopening, and things really are getting back to normal in a real way. A lot of the restaurants and stuff in this neighborhood and around the country are getting back to work. So things are kind of getting back to normal.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.